Got it. Got it.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Pulpwood Queen channel. I'm Tracy Carnes, reminding everybody, if you haven't done so, please subscribe. And that way you don't miss a minute of all the great discussions and videos that the Pulpwood Queen posts. And so now, without further ado, the Pulpwood Queen herself, Kathy L. Murphy. Yay!
Yay! We all made it through the Arctic blast. It looks like we're here tonight. We've got a wonderful author we're going to be featuring. Oh, here comes Lovelace Cook. Let me get her in. We have Jeffrey Lawrence Matthews for One Must Tell the Bees, our last book club read of the month. And is it a doozy? I'm telling you, I've never read a story like this before. Jeffrey, tell us what you're doing and where you are right now.
Right now, I am in Rhode Island. We have grandchildren up here. We came up for Christmas, and I have a technology story. Since we're all having technology problems here tonight.
Go ahead.
I have a confession to make. I have been AWOL on the Pulpwood Queen's Facebook page for about 6 months, and I tell you why. I tell you why.
Okay.
About 6 months ago, all of a sudden, my Facebook information totally vanished and a new page turned up and all my friends disappeared. Pulpwood Queens disappeared. And it was a different Jeffrey Matthews Facebook page and different friends, old friends, people I hadn't sort of been in touch with for a while. And I thought, gee, did everybody all of a sudden leave? Did I do something? Did Mark Zuckerberg get mad at me or something? Is what's going on here? And I just couldn't figure it out. So I just started rebuilding my Facebook contacts one by one and doing other things that I have to do, like the follow-up to One Must Tell the Bees. And but I kind of, in the back of my mind, I kept thinking, what was going on with this? Why did this all of a sudden happen? And at Christmas time, we were with our one of our daughters, and I was describing this to her. And she said, "Dad." And that's a bad way to get started.
Oh no. Okay.
Dad. And I said, what? And she said, let me see your phone. So I handed her my phone and she did 2 or 3 things. And she said, Dad, you switched to your author page. You still have your other page. You just switched to an author page. It's all right there. So I said, okay, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I don't know how all this works. So anyway, the bizarre thing and the wonderful thing is that about 24 hours after that incident, when I finally realized what had happened to all these Facebook people that I thought had left, Kathy emails me and says, you're on. And here I am. So here I am.
I had something similar happen. I could not, people were posting their blogs on the Pulpwood Queen Presents her blog page, and I wasn't seeing them. Well, Facebook changed, if you had more than one page, they changed something in their algorithms where it would go to my Kathy L. Murphy artist page sometimes, and then I couldn't see anything Pulpwood Queen.
Yep.
And then, so that's what was happening. I was on my Kathy L. Murphy artist page. And so when I switched back to the Kathy L. Murphy page, there's the post they were sending me, but they change things and then they don't give us any information. So I really don't think you were at fault with that. We just didn't know.
I just would like you to vouch to my daughter for me after the call. That would be very helpful.
I'm going to testify on your behalf that this was not your fault. I've had the similar thing happen, but we are thrilled you're here tonight.
Thank you.
And what's the temperature in Rhode Island?
Well, right now it's a balmy 28 degrees.
Oh my gosh. I think we're going to get down to 35 tonight. The first night it hasn't froze. And what's interesting to me is when I just had all new pipes because the ice storm we had a year ago in February blew all the pipes in my house. So they put in those new expandable ones. Well, I thought, well, I won't have a problem. Well, the cold water froze, but the hot water did not. So I was able to take a shower in very hot water. So I just kept a pitcher of cold water every once in a while to hit me with so I wouldn't just scald myself. Anyway, crazy stories.
Yes.
But we are happy to be here. We're happy. I'm sorry. I'm happy it's the end of 2022. This was the most trying year of my life. I don't know about you, Jeffrey, but it was astounding how many things could go wrong. And I have a big sign in front of my house in black with gold lettering that says Murphy's Law, because that's kind of what I felt like my entire 66 years on this planet has been like, is if it can go wrong, it will, right, Tracy? She's seen a lot of this because she lives right down the road from me, right, Trace?
I do. I do.
Well,
Yeah.
and that's why we read books, right? To get into a different world.
Yes.
Absolutely. And I have to tell you, I'm going to ask you a few questions
Sure,
about
great.
you personally first before we delve into this tome. And do not let the thickness, I like thick books, I cannot lie. I like books to have substance to them, and I cannot wait for the sequel. But before we talk about this President Lincoln story, I want to know a little bit about how in the world, for those that didn't hear you at Girlfriend Weekend or don't know about you, and that may be listening on our YouTube channel, how in the world did you get into this writing world?
I wanted to be a writer probably from the time I was in high school. And I tell you, it was very primal. And I remember the moment. And it may sound weird, it may not. But my parents used to read the Sunday newspaper every Sunday after church. And it was kind of this ritual, and they would read the whole thing. And I remember watching my father reading a James Thurber story and laughing. And I thought, wow, somebody wrote something that is causing him to laugh hysterically. And he was not a grumpy man. He was not a hard to know man. But the idea that this story could affect him like that really impressed me. And so I started reading James Thurber, and I ultimately decided I wanted to be James Thurber, and I started writing short humor. And I took a few courses in college that were very helpful. I took a great journalism course, some writing courses, but I was never going to go all the way. I didn't have the self-confidence to say, I'm going to be a writer. And once I got out of school, I went into finance. And I worked in New York. By day, I worked at Merrill Lynch. And by night, I went to my little studio apartment and I wrote short stories. I wrote short humor and sent them around. And I always had about 3 or 4 stories going at any given time. This was before email. You had to actually physically mail them out, and a self-addressed stamped envelope. And when I got them back, I would rewrite them and send them back out again to another publication. I'd start with the New Yorker. I did it all wrong. I'd start with the best. I started with the New Yorker, and then I worked my way down. But I got a piece published in the Boston Globe one day, and that was pretty cool. And then I got a piece published in the New York Times, and that was even cooler. And then I got a piece published. I got a piece that was actually read on the air by Susan Stamberg on NPR. And that was really cool. And that was over a 2-year period. And during that 2 years, I was paid for those 3 different acceptances. I was paid a total of $150 because the New York Times was the only one that paid. And I realized, okay, this writing thing is not going to pay for a family. And so I better focus on the finance thing. So I did that. And over time, though, I would always be writing. Oh, that was kind of my hobby. I always had a novel going. And in truth, they were always very ambitious international spy thrillers, because my Wall Street career involved international companies. I studied international oil companies. So my stories always involved somebody in the Middle East doing something nefarious. The problem is that the protagonist was always a very bland version of myself. And I would always get totally bored with the guy. And after 200 pages, I just put it away and start something else. So in 2005, I was investigating part of my job as a finance guy in my career by that time was investing in companies. And I was looking at a company called Google, and they had a product called Google Blogger. And I was looking at all the different things Google did as an analyst guy. And Google Blogger said, in 5 minutes, you can have a blog, you can be blogging. And so I typed things in and I did this, and all of a sudden I had a blog and I had to give it a name. And I called it Jeff Matthews Is Not Making This Up, which is a total ripoff of Dave Barry. I'm a big Dave Barry fan.
Oh, yeah.
And I had been writing columns, financial columns for different trade publications over the years. That was another way I kept the writing thing going. Always kind of humorous, but serious articles about things that were happening in finance. And I began to do those in my blog. And I've developed a readership of people who are interested in these things. And I developed without thinking that I was doing this, I developed a writing muscle and an ability to take something and work on it and fix it and get it worthwhile. Because when you have a blog, you have this feedback system that's immediate. You're not sending it out to agents. You're not hoping some publisher is going to love it. You're getting feedback in real time. And that was a fabulous tool. And in 2009, I was approached by McGraw-Hill because I'd written a blog series about my visits to the Berkshire Hathaway shareholder meetings in Omaha. And you probably heard of Warren Buffett. He hosts an annual meeting every year that attracts 30,000 people from all around the world. It's a 3-day weekend. Buffett calls it Woodstock for capitalists. It's a lot of fun. And I wrote a blog series, a 10-part blog series about going there and how much, basically who goes, why they go, what they get out of it, and what makes Buffett so unique. And I got a call from McGraw-Hill saying, would you turn this into a book? And my answer was, sure. I've always wanted to write a book. Great, let's do it. So I got a contract. I wrote the book. And once that was done, I wanted to keep writing. And I had this idea, Kathy, as a longtime Sherlock Holmes reader, of writing a story about Sherlock Holmes called The Death of Sherlock Holmes. That's what it was going to be. It was going to be the book that explained what happened to Sherlock Holmes. Because I thought, who wouldn't want to read about the death of Sherlock Holmes? Well, lots of people, but I didn't know that at the time. But I began working on that while I was still doing my thing. And one day, a secondary story popped into my head. Sherlock Holmes meets Abraham Lincoln. And I thought, wow, that would be a great story. No one's ever put Sherlock Holmes and Abraham Lincoln. I wonder why they've never done that, because dates sort of work. And unless you're a Sherlockian maniac who insists that Sherlock was born on, Sherlockians are crazy. They're like Star Trekians,
Yes.
And, but I worked it out and I thought, okay, I could do it. He would have been very young. Lincoln would have been in the last year of his life. They would have met in America because Lincoln never went to England. What would have brought Sherlock Holmes to America in 1864? Well, obviously the Civil War. That wars change things. They cause transitions. They cause upheaval. Well, why would he be in America in 1864? Well, he was a chemist. That was his big hobby. As a detective, he was always working at his chemical table whenever Watson blew in with a new case. So why not make him a young chemist working for the DuPont Gunpowder Company in Delaware? And I was enough of a Civil War student to know that DuPont made half the gunpowder for the Union Army. They were working on a smokeless gunpowder at the time. Why not bring Sherlock to America as a researcher on smokeless gunpowders for DuPont? And that's how he gets to America. So the whole book came out of this idea of, how do I get Sherlock Holmes to America in a believable way to meet Abraham Lincoln? And that's how it all happened.
It's an amazing story. I mean, I was thinking about, Abraham Lincoln. I listened to, was it 34 tapes were done on this one book? It was unabridged that I listened to driving back and forth to school. And I found out lots of things about Abraham Lincoln that I never knew and never was taught in school. So did you start out really young becoming fascinated with him, or how did that?
I'll tell you that I got out of school, and I'm a Northerner, and Northerners didn't grow up with the Civil War in their blood the way
Right.
Southerners do. My family was sort of Revolutionary War. We had
Right.
that in our veins. I literally, when I got out of school, I knew so little about the Civil War that I could not have told you the difference between Andrew Jackson and Stonewall Jackson.
Yeah.
I didn't know which one had been president and which one had been a Confederate general. And one day I was reading a biography of Lincoln. Fortunately, I married well. That's the key.
Great.
Because one day I was reading a biography of Lincoln early in our marriage, and I said to Nancy, I don't know anything about the Civil War. And Nancy bought me a book. And the Civil War is a rabbit hole you can go down, that you can stay in forever. And people ask why. Why is there this weird subset of humans called Civil War buffs? And I think the answer is that it was a very personal war.
Yeah.
It was one of the last non-mechanized wars. It was fought on foot and on horseback. So individual decisions really mattered. An individual on a battlefield could change a battle, which happened at Gettysburg, it happened at Chickamauga. And also, these guys knew each other. This wasn't Germany invading France every 30 years like they used to. These were Americans who they had been to West Point together. They had fought in Mexico together, the officers. Longstreet was in Grant's wedding. And then 15 years later, Grant is chasing Longstreet and Lee across the state of Virginia to Appomattox Courthouse for the final surrender. So it's a very personal war. And that's what I think makes it so compelling. And then Lincoln, of course, the most compelling of all.
Yeah. It's crazy. When I moved to Texas, I think we covered the Civil War maybe 3 days in grade school, or I don't remember anything about the Civil War. But when I moved to Jefferson, Texas, they still have the Battle of Port Jefferson, which is a total fictitious battle, but they have the South win one day and the North win the next. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. And they wear the full outfits and they have people camping. All these guys come in and I've never seen anything like it. And most of the time it's the first weekend in May. It's so hot that I'm afraid they're going to die from wearing those wool suits, but I thought, well, I better take some history, because I don't know what's going on. Yeah. So I've learned, and there's a new take on a Civil War story every time you turn around. Yours was definitely different. But I have to mention a book. Have you read Jim Kokoris's book, The Best Part of Life?
No, I haven't.
Well, I need to get you that book because it's a story about a man who is a Civil War historian professor, but he specializes in footwear. And I laughed so hard through this book. It's not supposed to be funny, but I laughed because there's a scene where him and his sons go to a battle. They're invited because he's a historian, and he sees Abraham Lincoln walk across the battleground. He goes, "What's going on?" And he said, "Abraham Lincoln wasn't here." We know, but it'll just be more people will come if he's here. And I tell you, it was, and because I lived in a town that did this reenactment year after year after year, like 30 years, I just love that book so much. But I've got to get you, I'll get you a copy.
I'd love to.
But how many books on the Civil War have you read, or Abraham Lincoln?
I couldn't really tell you, probably a couple of dozen. And some of them many times. I've listened to Shelby Foote.
Yeah.
That was the one. It's Shelby Foote. If you don't know who Shelby Foote is, he wrote The Civil War, a Narrative, and it's a three volume comprehensive start to finish history of the Civil War, but it's told like a novel. He was a poet.
Yeah.
And a gravelly voiced fellow from Oxford, Mississippi, just had a wonderful voice. If you saw him on the Ken Burns special, he was that historian who just told wonderful stories about the Civil War. And I've probably listened to that half a dozen times, just driving and riding my bike, doing all kinds of stuff, because it's poetry, but it's also history. When I was doing the book, there it is.
I used to have dinner with him.
I'm sorry?
I used to have dinner with him.
Well, why are we talking to me and not talking to you?
You gotta tell him where you got that book.
I got this book in Franklin, Tennessee. I had always wanted to have the set. I never asked him for the set. You know, pretty much at this point, you could only get like the paperback. The hardbacks were hard to find. And I found this set. It is a first edition, and it's not signed because Shelby never signed his books and didn't like signing books. He thought, you know, only the bank needed his signature.
That's great.
I love these stories. I love these.
I never wanted to encroach on the friendship by going, yeah, but can't you sign mine? You know, and I never did. And I never had the set until recently because I didn't want to buy the paperback. But I now have first editions.
Now, did you ever run into Hampton Sides?
No.
Okay, because the reason I ask is I saw Hampton Sides, who wrote Hellhound on His Trail, which, if you have not read that, it is one of the great books of all time, and it's the greatest book, I think, about the Martin Luther King assassination and the manhunt for James Earl Ray. And I saw Hampton Sides speak at an event once, and he told the story of how he grew up in Oxford, Mississippi, and he played in a rock band with Shelby Foote's son. And they were in the attic practicing, and Shelby Foote came up and banged on the door and said, "Quiet down, I'm writing Appomattox."
Yay.
Oh man, this is really, really great stories. I gotta hear some more. You have another one for us?
Not about Shelby Foote. But he's got, I'll tell you a wonderful story he tells in that series that I think says a lot about the Southern view of Robert E. Lee. And, you know, they took Lee's statue down in Richmond, and I understand why. It was 60 feet tall. It was not meant to explain Lee and his role in the war. It was meant to glorify him.
Right.
But there's a wonderful vignette in the Civil War narrative about Lee and what he meant. There was a governor, the Virginia governor, his name escapes me right now. He had fought in the Civil War. His son had fought with Lee, was a corporal, I think, or a captain with Lee. Robert Wise, or Henry Wise, was the governor, and he had fought in the Civil War. He was home. His son came back from Appomattox. He'd been a captain with Lee, and his son said, "I just signed the loyalty oath to the Union after Appomattox." And Robert Wise stands up from the table and says, "You have disgraced this family, sir." And the son says, "But Dad, General Lee advised me to." And Wise says, "Oh, Well, that alters the situation. Whatever General Lee says is correct.
Oh my God. That's just crazy.
Yeah, there's a great Lee, I believe there was a lady that asked Robert E. Lee about the flag, about the rebel flag. And she's like, what am I supposed to do with it? And Lee responded, fold it up and put it away.
Lee and Grant were instrumental in bringing both sides back together. Remember what I said, that it was a very personal war and that both sides knew each other. Lee and Grant had been in Mexico together. They had met in Mexico. They hadn't fought together in Mexico, but Grant knew Lee in Mexico. And it was funny because, again, this is a vignette from the Shelby Foote's book. At Appomattox, Grant, when Lee comes into the house in Appomattox to surrender, Grant starts chatting with him and says, I remember you from Mexico. Remember we met? And Lee, who was dressed in his completely proper military uniform, and Grant's there in mud and boots and just come from the field, and Grant is trying to tell stories, and Lee just wants to get to the surrender. Lee finally cut him off and said, you know, I'm here to basically conduct business. Let's get going. You could just tell so many stories about those men. It's fabulous. I'm sorry, I have a hard time stopping once it starts.
No, I love hearing this story.
Fascinated by it. You know, my family is both Revolutionary War and Civil War. So these stories, you know, I'm fascinated by them.
It's great.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, and it's a part of history that I missed growing up in Kansas, because we're kind of like, Kansas is kind of that place where, you know, of course, everybody here thinks I'm a Yankee because I'm from Kansas, but up there, it was like, only war I remember ever discussing was World War II in Korea. You know, because I had great uncles that fought in the Pacific campaign. But so I just had to get busy reading, and I just read as much as I can. And I think this is one of those books that makes you want to read more. You know, once, like, you know, you said you're working on, I'm dying to know what in the world you're working on this second book. I mean, how far are you into it?
I'm about halfway through.
Wow.
Which means I'm about a tenth of the way through, right?
Right, we know. We're all authors. Yeah, we know.
But I am definitely going to make this one shorter. One Must Tell the Beast took 12 years, start to finish, and I want to write a shorter book that more people will be inclined to read. But I felt it couldn't be any shorter, and I said a lot of what I wanted to say in this one. It takes place in Tibet, largely. It takes place in the late 1800s, during a period of time that Kipling called the Great Game, which was a kind of a diplomatic chess match between Russia and Great Britain. Russia, the Tsar was trying to bring Russian influence south. He wanted a warm water port on the Indian Ocean. Even then, the Russians were trying to grab territory. The British were terrified that the Russians were going to come into India,
right,
which they controlled through the British Raj. So they were pushing their influence north, and they kind of came to grips around Tibet, which was a forbidden country. Right. It was unknown. It was sort of a satellite of China, but not really. And they didn't like any foreigners. If you were English and you were caught live in Tibet, even though they were Tibetan Buddhists, even though it was a Buddhist country, and right, killing anything was felt against their beliefs. they would kill you. And Sherlock Holmes is in Tibet. It stems from an actual story, a Sherlock Holmes story that Arthur Conan Doyle wrote. When Sherlock Holmes comes back from the dead, there was a period of time, if you remember, Arthur Conan Doyle killed off Sherlock Holmes. He said, I'm sick of writing this guy. I've got all these other things I want to write about. So he pretends he has Sherlock Holmes die in the Reichenbach Falls with Professor Moriarty. They tumble over the falls together, and Sherlock Holmes is missing. And then, of course, the pressure to bring him back gets so great that he revives him. He brings him back in a story called The Empty House.
Oh.
And Holmes comes into Watson's medical study, and Watson can't believe it. And he actually faints because he's seeing Sherlock Holmes, and he thought Sherlock Holmes was dead. And Holmes explains that he was spending 3 years incognito so that he would draw his enemies out and finally capture them all. And that's what he was back to do. Well, where did you go? What did you do? Well, I went for 2 years. I was in Tibet, disguised as an explorer that you may have read about, a Norwegian fellow. And I met the head Lama. I then went to Mecca and Khartoum, and then back to the continent. And I've always thought that, and that's all Arthur Conan Doyle ever says about that. It never comes up again. And I've always thought that's a really spiritual itinerary. And who wouldn't want to know what Sherlock Holmes and the Dalai Lama talked about? And as you may guess, Kathy, because one must tell the bees had a very current theme. As I was writing the story of Lincoln and what happened in the final days of the Civil War, and the importance of Abraham Lincoln, the importance of the Emancipation Proclamation, the difficulty Lincoln had, we were in this period of our history where statues were being pulled over. Grant's a bust of General Grant was actually pulled down in a San Francisco park because he owned a slave, and he was considered a bad guy for that, and his bust should come down. 6 months later, the San Francisco School Board actually voted to remove Abraham Lincoln's name from a school building, and because of his administration's policies towards Native Americans. Now, I don't know of any administration that has covered itself in glory when it comes to treatment of Native Americans. And I also, as far as Grant goes, I know enough about Grant and his slave ownership. He did own a slave. We know very little about it. He probably either bought it or was given the slave by his father-in-law, who was a slave owner. Grant married into a slave-owning family. We know very little about it. How long? It couldn't have been more than 3 years that Grant owned the man. The one thing we do know is that Grant freed him. And he could have sold him, but he freed him. And then, of course, as Lieutenant General of the Union armies under his command freed 4 million slaves, thanks to the Emancipation Proclamation. So the idea that we should tarnish this man because of somebody's tweet about something about him that is not a nice thing, but in the context of a man who helped free 4 million human beings, was something I felt that needed to be talked about, and that's one of the themes of the book, that we really need to understand our history before we try to rewrite it. And as you might,
Amen. Amen.
Thank you. And as you might guess, in this next book, which is called On the Edge of Revelation, there is a current theme, and that is Tibet has been overtaken by China. This happened in 1950. It's nothing new, and really destroyed. And China has done terrible things in Tibet. And that's something that I want to foreshadow in this book. There are things that need to be talked about as far as what happened there that are much broader than just the Dalai Lama having to flee to India and set himself up there. So as always, there's something else beyond it, but it was that core idea that, gee, Sherlock Holmes met the Dalai Lama. That would be fun to talk. That would be really fun to write about.
It's absolutely fascinating. And it's so true what you're saying, because the more I read, the more I realize the things that I've been taught in school are incorrect. And I think the biggest eye-opening experience I ever had as far as history was being an art major. I decided to take an African American art history course. And that's when my eyes were fully opened on really what happened with this country, and the fact that it was not just the United States that made African slaves. There are a lot of different places in the world that were doing this, and it has been done in the past. But we've got to learn from our history, and what better way to open up that conversation than writing a book that makes you go, well, I wonder about, this is what happens to me. I read a book like this, and then I go down these rabbit holes.
Yes.
And then I go, need to read more books about this. And when I was going to, back in school, I would listen to audio tapes on history, because if you don't know history, it's hard to understand context of a lot of the classes I was taking. So this was a fascinating story. I cannot wait to read. Now, do you go into India? And you know how everybody, I love India. Do you go into India in the next book?
Yes. Well, so I just want to mention one thing about One Must Tell the Bees, but I do want to get to India. I mentioned that I started with this idea of the death of Sherlock Holmes. Then Sherlock Holmes Meets Abraham Lincoln came to mind, and the story how to get him to America. And ultimately he ends up in the manhunt for John Wilkes Booth. And we now know that was his very first case. That's the story of One Must Tell the Bees. But my original idea was that since Sherlock Holmes is a fictional character, and I grew up reading his stories, so I knew from day one that he was a fictional character, I never felt I could put him in the manhunt for Booth. I had originally created this idea of having him in the hunt for the Confederate gold. When Jefferson Davis fled the Richmond White House, he took with him the Confederate treasury in the train. There's always been a debate about how much money was in it, how much gold, that kind of thing. Probably not much. Probably it was dispersed to troops along the way. Jefferson Davis, whatever else he was, and he was a slave owner and he was fighting for slavery, he was not a guy who was going to steal money from other people. But there's always been this debate among Civil War buffs of what happened to the Confederate gold. So my original thought was, I'm going to have Sherlock solve the mystery of the Confederate gold, because he's a fictional guy and no one's going to be able to accept having him in the manhunt for Booth. Then I had a dinner with a friend. I was probably 8 years into the book, and I had it pretty well set up, but I hadn't gotten the ending done. And this was a business friend. I was still working. And he was probably 45 years old at the time, well-read, intelligent guy. And he said, and I would tell everybody I knew that I was writing a book. I know some writers like to do it themselves. They don't want to talk the book out. They don't want to spend so much time telling everybody about it. They never actually sit down and do it. I wanted the discipline. I wanted the pressure. I wanted people to say, how's the book going? Because I wanted to be able to finish it and not slink away and say, I wasn't really doing that, that. So he says to me, how's the book going? And I tell him, and he says, now, what exactly is it about? And I said, well, it's Sherlock Holmes Meets Abraham Lincoln. And he says, now, was he born in America? I thought he only lived in England. I thought he was British. Was he actually born in America? And I thought, oh,
He doesn't know.
He thinks Sherlock Holmes was a real man.
Yeah.
And I realized in that instance that in that very instant that most people of a certain age probably thought he was a real detective because he's been fictionalized over the years and he's such a vivid character. And in that instant, I thought, okay, I'm going to put him in the manhunt for Booth and I'm going to tell it as history. The entire tone of the book changed in 30 seconds.
Wow.
And
Wow.
it was the key to the tone of the book, because from then on, anything that wasn't history, anything that sounded fake or sounded kind of a little too fluffy was out. It was a great guardrail, because from then on it was, this has to read like history. This can't veer from the history. For example, the manhunt for Booth went on 12 days. 12 days. Get your mind around that. A man kills the president. They can't find him for 12 days.
That's amazing.
That's an eternity. Now, for 5 of those days, he was hiding in a pine thicket. He didn't move. There's not a lot of action when Booth is hiding in a pine thicket and Sherlock Holmes is trying to track him. So I had to compress I had to compress things without actually changing things. The manhunt in the book still takes 12 days, but it doesn't seem like 12 days. There was a lot of that had to go on. And it was absolutely key to the book. And my favorite story about that is when I was getting my picture taken for the back cover, the photographer's assistant, who was this young person, maybe 2 years out of college, she comes up to me, she says, "You know, I didn't know Sherlock Holmes was in the manhunt for John Wilkes Booth." And I said, "Yeah, pretty good, huh?" That was what I wanted. And so that was the key to that book, Kathy. As for India, I had a similar revelation here. I've got to get Sherlock Holmes to India, to Tibet. I've got to do it in a way that is like bringing him to America in 1864. It's gotta make sense. It's gotta be true. It's gotta be accurate. How do I do it? Well, he's got to go through India to get to Tibet, because the British controlled India. So obviously he's going to go somewhere into India. Well, where does he go? Well, he's got to go to Calcutta, because that's where the Governor General was. But then how does he actually go into Tibet as this explorer? How does that happen? And I was really having a hard time with this, because India is vast. The border with Tibet is think of the United States. Think of, you're trying to figure out how to bring someone into the United States. Do you do it through Florida? Does he go up through El Paso? Does he go through San Diego? You know, and then just logistically, how does that work? How does he get into Tibet from there? And I'm your age, Kathy. I grew up on the Beatles.
Yeah.
And one day I thought, where was Rishikesh? Where were the Beatles in India?
Oh my God.
I look on a map, and Rishikesh is right near the Himalayas,
Yeah.
right on a pilgrimage path that went right up into Tibet and to Mount Kailash, which is the most sacred mountain in Tibetan, Hindu, and Bon philosophy. And that was the key. Okay, now I've got it. They're going through Rishikesh, and I've got a lot of Beatles I'm going to have fun with in this. And
Oh my God.
it's going to be a lot of fun with the references. So that was the big help there.
So have you been to Tibet, or?
I have not. I have read. I've got probably 20 books on Tibet that I've read. The interesting thing about Tibet, because you have two types of people who wrote books about Tibet, starting with the Jesuits in 1600. They were the first ones to go into Tibet. And from then on, you had different explorers who would go in, sneak in. There was a Swedish guy who snuck in several times. You also had mystics who were interested in Tibetan philosophy that wanted to meet the Dalai Lama. And so you have kind of two types of books. And it's fascinating because the explorers, the Swedish guy, they want to tell you how deep the snow was in the mountain pass and how cold it was and how quickly the water froze and all that stuff. The mystics want to tell you about the philosophies and the person they saw who claimed he could fly. And so you have kind of these two very divergent views of it. And I was having a very hard time kind of getting what is it really like to be on the ground, as I did with One Must Tell the Bees. I read several great books about the Lincoln White House. What was it really like? Where did he sit? Where did he live? Where did he work? And that's where a lot of those scenes came out of. Lincoln was the first president who had an African-American come in through the front door. And that was Frederick Douglass.
Oh, yeah.
The rest were all obviously servants who came in the back door. Things like that. So I was having a very hard time getting a sense of what is it really like to be in Tibet in the late 1800s? What is the food like? I know what the food is. I know what they eat, but what does it taste like? What does it smell like? What are the sanitary conditions or lack thereof? And then I was at a book fair this summer, and I found a book that was written in 1950 by the son of Lowell Thomas, the broadcaster. He was an original broadcaster who happened to go into Tibet in 1948 with a film crew. And it was the first color pictures of Tibet. He interviewed the Dalai Lama, and it's fabulous because his son wrote this book, and his son was this young American, completely open to everything. And it's all there. What it's like, how it smells, how bad the food is, what you have to get used to, what kind of toilet paper they use. All that stuff was in this book. So I honestly don't think I need to go, and I really don't want to go because the Chinese have turned it into kind of an Epcot center. You know, they destroyed tens of thousands of monasteries and temples in Tibet in the 1950s, and then they started rebuilding them for the tourist trade. What they did is disgusting, and I really want no part of it.
Yeah. Well, this is fascinating. I'd like to see that list of those books of Tibet. Did you read any books set in India?
I've read a lot of books set in India, yes. And I've done a lot of, one great resource I found is Google Books. You can find a lot of strange books that aren't on Amazon, aren't in a library. They've gone out of print, and they're suddenly available on Google Books. And if you do searches for strange words, you'll come across something, a reference to, let's say, the railroad system. And how did the railroad system get started? Because Sherlock Holmes is going to have to go from Calcutta to Rishikesh by rail. How does he do that?
Mm-hmm.
And so you start searching for the railroad, and you find a history of the Indian railroads written by some civil servant back in 1890, and it's all right there. How much it cost, what the classes were. Hindus are a caste system. They're very rigidly caste system, and you couldn't ride on certain cars if you were a certain caste. And I love going down. You use the word rabbit holes. I love going down those rabbit holes, Kathy. It's so much fun learning.
Well, I do too, because it's like, it also reminds you of just how much you don't know. You'd think at this point, in your life, you go, man, I know some stuff. I realize I know nothing, absolutely nothing. So I just keep reading and reading and reading. So, and I know that you apologize for this and the next book will be thinner, but I actually love a book that has substance. And I've been, criticized a lot for picking, Gates of the Alamo and different books that are tomes, 500 pages. But when I love a story, I don't want it to end. So it's always great to have a thick book. So, and besides, your subject matter lends to a thicker book. So I wouldn't worry about making it thinner. I think people who are fascinated with those two subjects are going to read it no matter what how many pages you put in it. I don't know. Anybody, let's open this up for some conversation. Anybody else have some comments or questions for Jeffrey?
I do.
Yes, Sarah.
Hey, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, I just found the novel was fascinating. At times I'd go, maybe Sherlock really was real, you know, and all the details like of the gunpowder factory. And I mean, you did your research so well. I was going to ask, you know, how you put these two together, but you've already explained it. And I did want to comment about the ending where Sherlock's, you know, tending to his bees, and the philosophy obviously was, you know, coming from that, you know, having met the Dalai Lama. And so you laid the ground really well for this one that's coming. And I just want to thank you for that. And I also want to mention that I was raised by my father, who was from Georgia, and for all my relatives down there, the Civil War is still alive, believe it. So it's, you know, and I'm in the far corner of Northwest Washington, raised without any sense of that. So, except for through dad, you know. So it's interesting how our country still plays out.
Well, Sarah, I'll tell you a funny story. As I said, as a Northerner, I really was not raised with that kind of knowledge and that deep sense of it. But over time, I developed it. And one night, I had dinner. I was still working, and I had dinner in Baltimore with a company. And it was a big conference, and we were at a restaurant, and I was sitting at a table with a woman from Richmond and her husband. Her husband was the CEO of some company, and she and I talked Civil War the whole time.
Oh, wow.
And this would have been probably 1995, maybe 2000, something like that. She was a very charming, elderly, white-haired woman. And when we got up from the table, she said, "It's been very nice talking with you. And just remember this, Bobby Lee is a great man."
Wow. Yeah.
I said, I know. And you know, that look in her eyes, that was really something.
Yeah.
And she used the present tense. She didn't
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. I find the whole thing fascinating. And I find this I understand why his statue was taken down.
Yeah.
But it should be known that he and Grant did a great thing for the country in coming together. Grant did something, and again, Shelby Foote's book has it. Grant was known to be, for want of a better word, a hard ass when it came to surrenders. He was U.S. Grant, Ulysses S. Grant. The S didn't actually mean anything. It was a mistake on his record when he went to West Point, and he kept it. But the newspapers like to call him Unconditional Surrender Grant. That was his nickname, because his very first battle, I think it was Belmont, the terms he offered were, he's unconditional surrender. That's what I want. And he got it. And he became the first Northern hero and known as Unconditional Surrender Grant after that. But at Appomattox, he went with Lee, and Lee, he presented harder terms on paper with Lee. But then Lee said, you know, gosh, our men, Southerners aren't issued their sidearms. So those are their personal weapons, and also their horses are their personal horses. They're not issued by the Confederacy, and it would be great if they could keep them. And Grant at first resisted, and then he said, "Fine, okay." And Lee was very, very grateful for that. Secondly, Grant asked Lee how his men were doing for food, because one of the reasons the surrender happened at Appomattox was because there was a shipment of, I think it was corn, to the Appomattox Railroad Station that Lee's men were trying to get to. Phil Sheridan got there first, and that's what ended the war. So these men were starving, and Grant offered him rations from the Union supplies, far above anything Lee had asked for. And so that went a long way. The third thing that Grant did was, after the surrender, he came out and some of the federal troops were firing cannons to celebrate. And Grant said, no, cut that out. They're our countrymen now. Let's move on.
It's the conversation, you know, we have to have it. We don't, a lot of people don't want you talking about certain things, but I go, how are we going to understand if we don't see it from everybody's perspective? I mean,
I think, there on that point, there's an idea out there that there is no real history, that everybody kind of makes stuff up and you can kind of paint it the way you want to paint it. And one of the things that I really learned writing this book is, no, there is real history there. You can really find it. And I can't tell you how many mistakes, not many major mistakes, but I found more than a few mistakes in some of the history books by people like Ron Chernow and Doris Kearns Goodwin that you can find. The internet is a marvelous thing. You can get to a lot of source material and find where the quotes came from. I can't tell you how many times there are websites that publish 10 things that Abraham Lincoln said, and one of them always is, whatever you are, be a good one. Lincoln never said that. He didn't say that. I forget who said it, but you can find it if you actually look for it. So the history is there, and it's there to be learned. And I'm with you all the way, Kathy. It's not hidden. You just have to look for it.
it's amazing because, you know, I was an art history minor, so everything is about, you know, I lived at the library, and they want the facts, but I also like the fact that your book is kind of faction, where it actually is a wonderful way of getting people to like history, because I had history teachers that were coaches that did not want to teach history. So, you know, you get that monotone and the standardized test. And it wasn't until I got some college professors that were living, breathing historians that I got bit by that bug. But I think this is a wonderful book to springboard us into, and starting a new year. Maybe we should make a pact to read a book about something in American history, or it's amazing some of the things that you can learn. I had no idea that Abraham Lincoln, when I was listening to all those tapes, he was a lot different than the way the stovepipe hat, and, you know, and the beard and all these things that you had in your mind. He was a lot different. He was a backwoodsman, and he self-educated. It's a fascinating story. But everybody, I hope you get your copy. This is the time to get your books and be reading. We have a little break between now and New Year's to be a wonderful book to read. What's the craziest thing that's happened since this book came out that somebody's asked you about?
Boy.
Maybe the Sherlock Holmes was real, you know? Okay.
Yeah, I had a woman who wanted to know more about this Sherlock Holmes in America. Can I read anything else about him? And actually, no. I'm the only guy that actually wrote this kind of thing. And what's funny is, here's something else that will, I think, be interesting. I had a lot of people telling me, well, you're going to market this as a Sherlock book, right? You're going to try to sell it. You're going to try to get the Sherlock fan clubs, and there's all these Sherlockian groups. And I said, no, actually, I'm not. The reason is that these guys are so Star Trekian Oh, Watson wasn't married in 1918
Yeah, yeah.
because in the case of the missing vegetables, his wife had coreopsis and she could not have survived another 5, to get all that crazy stuff. I think actually the weirdest thing is the reaction I've gotten from real hardcore Sherlockians who won't read it because it couldn't have happened. Because everyone knows Sherlock Holmes was born in 1954, and I say he was born in 1948, 49. Well, the 1854 date is made up from one of the stories, but I'm not going to go there tonight with you all. But I could argue it as well as any Sherlockian. However, the nice thing is it's kind of broken through in the Sherlock world. I have a guy in Minnesota who's a hardcore Sherlockian who wrote a review for his newsletter, and he sent it to me totally out of the blue. And it's the kind of review you daydream about from the Sherlockian point of view. It's look, this book is not anything that we have become accustomed to when it comes to Sherlock, because we've created this life for him based on all these other things. But this book is based, absolutely everything in this book can relate to what Arthur Conan Doyle said about him. And that was my point. I didn't want to make stuff up about Sherlock Holmes that really theoretically couldn't have happened. Because I'm a Sherlockian too, but I'm not like that. I'm not fixed to these weird ideas that they've developed over the years. And he said, but you got to read it. And it was wonderful. And I've been in contact with him since. He's edited, he's doing an anthology that I wrote a quick short story for, a Sherlock Holmes short story. He's a wonderful guy. And I will tell you that it is getting more and more play in the Sherlock world, as hard as that has been to break into.
This just reads to me like a movie. I mean, have you had any movie interest?
I've had a lot of people say that. I have not had any who is an agent or.
Hey, if you're
no.
listening out there, people, you need to check this out.
Actually, I take that back. There's a guy who is a reader for Warner Brothers who read it for a friend of mine who is a screenwriter who thinks it should be a movie. And this guy's reaction was, yeah, it should be a movie. I can't do anything about it because Warner Brothers is having terrible financial difficulties right now. But it has I have gotten some positive reaction along those lines.
Well, and I just wanted to mention to you, I started out as a bookseller, and we worked the counter where people would come up to order books. And this was the craziest thing I ever had happen as a bookseller. I had a woman come up to me and she goes, yes. She goes, I would like to order the series of videos of the actual tapings of the Civil War. And I said, I'm sorry. I go, the actual videotapings of Civil War battles? And she said, yes, I saw it on TV. I go, okay, I'm thinking I'm going to help this lady. I think what you saw was the Ken Burns documentary that used actual photographs and music of that time to tell the story. She goes, no. She goes, it was actual footage that they video. I go, ma'am, they did not have video recorders at that time. She goes, I saw it and I'm going to another bookstore. And she left. And I mean, everybody by then, all the other booksellers were going, what did she just say? And I go, this is why, we need to have conversations and we need to be open to listen, because I know where she was coming from. She was impressed with it, but I'm sure that's what happens a lot of times when people get locked into a fictional character story. But read this, you guys. I think you're going to find it absolutely fascinating. And any last comments from anybody before we let him get back to his family on this holiday season?
I love doing this, so ask away. Anything you want to know, I'm here.
Well, he's blogging all this week. And so if you want to ask a question or talk about anything, now's the opportunity to do so. And when we end this meeting, Jeffrey, I want to talk to you. So don't leave. I have something I want to bring up to you. But I just want to tell everybody that I thank all the authors that have been present this year for their week of being featured as official 2022 book club selections. We're going to be announcing our 2023 coming up at our annual convention, which is in Florida, just around the corner. So go to the website now and check it all out. If you have any questions, get them to me quick because I'm going to be traveling there myself. So thank you, Jeffrey.
Thank
Every
you.
time you jump on board, I'm sorry you missed us all this time, but I do hope that you'll jump in. We will not be starting back up for all of our online things until February, because most of the authors are coming in January that are being featured, and you'll be able to talk to them in person. And it's our first live one since 2000, so we're pretty pumped about this Girlfriend Weekend. It's going to be our biggest one ever. And thank you for ending our year with such a wonderful presentation in this interview. And when do you think this book, it's not going to be 12 years, is it?
No, I can guarantee that. It's not going to be
Okay.
12 years. I think it'll be, I'm hoping for 2 years. I'm hoping.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, just remember, in 2 years, be sure and send me ahead of time, you know, the manuscript or galley so I can get it in my reading radar when I pick my books. I cannot believe how many books people send me in December for 2023 picks. You guys, I picked them way in advance, so I have to have time to read them. Get them to me as soon as you can. Hard copy. It doesn't have to be bound, but do get me your books. And I understand if they're uncorrected proofs. That's not a big deal to me. I understand that fully. So thank you, Jeffrey. And so what are your plans for New Year's?
We get together with friends we've been getting together with for 40 years, every New Year.
Oh,
Yeah, that's
is
why
it just a house party?
it's just 4 people. We've always done it. We've done it since our children were little and kind of the same ages. And last year we were together, and I got a call that my mother had fallen at about 11 o'clock that night. So that changed everything. And my mother, I just talked to my mother about an hour ago, and before this started, she's still hanging in there. But that's what we'll be doing. So.
Oh, well, Happy New Year. And thank you for bringing us this wonderful read. We
Believe me,
will
thank
see
you.
you all at Girlfriend Weekend. So everybody get on the Pulpwood Queen presents her picks and watch the blogs for Jeffrey all this week. Ask him any questions and then send any emails to thepulpwoodqueen@gmail.com. Do you have a website, Jeffrey?
I do.
Okay.
JLawrenceMatthews.com.
Okay,
JLawrenceMatthews.com.
jlawrencematthews.com, and we'll be seeing lots more from you in the future. So thank you. Happy New Year. And bye, everybody. It's all about the story. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
No. Hello there. Hello? Hello, hello? Hello? Hi there. I can't hear you. Okay.
How about now?
Hi there. I can hear you now.
Great. Okay. Well, I don't know if I had you down for girlfriend weekend or not.
No.
Okay. Well, let me tell you what happened. I have an author who cannot come, one of our keynote speakers. And he's already paid to come and everything, but he cannot make it. So this event is January 13th through the 15th in Amelia Island, but that package I could pass on to you and put you in his spot.
Really?
Yeah. So it's January 13th through the 15th, and he's on the program as a keynote. You don't have to speak for very long, but it would just give you another opportunity to, and I don't know, Naples is quite a ways from Amelia Island, but not as far. I'm driving. So, but I just thought this would be, I thought, here you are from Naples. Are you going to be back in Florida at that time?
Count me in, Kathy.
Okay. I will send you tomorrow all the information that you're going to need.
Right.
And I'm working on finalizing the program and everything between the holiday. But I think everybody needs to hear this story. And I just thought, I'm sad it was James Wade who can't make it. And I'm sad that he can't come, but I'm really happy if you could come.
I'll count me in. I'll talk to Nancy and
Okay.
double check. I just checked the calendar. We're clear. We love Amelia Island. We go there on our way back and forth. So there's a bed and breakfast we like to stay at where we know the owners. And so
well, you can stay there, or we do have a block of rooms at the Marriott where it's going to be at. And they're adjoining. There's the courtyard, and then there's the Spring Hill Suites. The suites one I think is right on the beach, but the convention center's kind of in between. And we do have a block that we're getting a discount. So if they are already booked, it's the links up on the website. If you talk to them, be sure and tell them you're a Pulpwood Queen author, and they'll give you the group rate. But or you can stay in the bed and breakfast. The only thing is, if you're there, you won't miss anything.
Right.
So many times people stay off site and then they miss sessions.
I get it. I get it. Sure.
But Friday night will be the author meet and greet.
Okay.
And so we're going to introduce all our authors, and it's going to be at the convention center. And we're also it's kind of a Bollywood theme, because we're going to launch Andrew Gattani's 5-book series called Winds of Destiny. It's a Downton Abbey version set in India of a royal family.
Wow.
It's amazing, amazing. She took her 20 years to write these books.
Yeah.
And we're going to launch them. So that's Friday night. Panels on Friday and Saturday. Saturday night is our great big ball of hairball. Everybody wears white. Bring your wife. Just wear something white. It doesn't matter what. It's going to be a lot of fun. And then Sunday, we're going to have a lot of things for authors and the Pat Conroy Center, and a lot of my agents coming from New York, Marley Rusoff. I'm going to talk about that. I'll send you the program. And
Great.
then Sunday night is our awards celebration. All the 2022 authors will be introduced for a group photo. And then our 2022 books of the year will be announced. And then our 2023 authors will be introduced. And then sometime in there, Jonathan or somebody's going to give the amount of money we raised for the Pat Conroy Center. Everybody donates something that is kind of related to the book autographed, and all the money goes to the Pat Conroy Center. We help fund the Pat Conroy Low Country Book Club convention.
Okay.
And I've been doing that now. This may be the sixth year, and it's a lot of fun. You can buy some really great things.
Okay.
I've come away with some pretty amazing items myself, but I'll send you everything tomorrow. How's that?
Excellent. I look
We'll
forward.
talk to Nancy and see
Well.
if you guys can come. And, if you can, I've got your author photo and your JPEG, so I'll add you to the photo album of everybody that's confirmed coming.
Great.
Sound good?
I'm delighted. Yeah. Thank
Well,
you.
Happy New Year, okay?
Delighted and honored. That's a wonderful way to start the new year.
Yeah, I'm really excited that you can come. Okay, well, I'll end it. I'll have this up on the YouTube channel by tomorrow and be sharing it on all the pages. But here we go. You got
Thank
all
you,
week.
Kathy. You're the best.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it. Great questions. Great fun. Thank you.